to stop the gangs responsible for putting lives at risk. Their words. Well, GB News Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White joins us now live from Dover, where just yesterday he was on the very same stretch of sea where these migrants sadly drowned. Mark, what did you see yesterday?
Well, it was a day of very intense migrant activity. We knew it was likely to be a very busy day, which is why we decided to charter a boat and get out there mid-channel to capture what exactly was happening as these small boats crossed into British waters. It didn't take as long at all as it became light for the first of the boats to start coming across onto the British side of the English Channel, and we came across a 7-metre-long boat with 22 people on board, mostly men. There were 2 women and a child on board as well. And as is routine now, when they see shipping in that area, they come up to us, switch off their engine and ask for the rescue services. Now, the skipper on board our vessel was duty-bound then to call in to the Coast Guard and to get the rescue services out to pick these people up in British waters. There was a child on board who the migrants said was feeling the effects of the cold, and I'm sure they absolutely were. It was freezing out there. The boat was waterlogged in the bottom of the vessel as well. Now, this boat, incidentally, had launched from a beach between Calais and Dunkirk, the same stretch of beach that just a couple of hours later another small boat would launch from, got out to just before that halfway point in the channel and then capsized. We're still trying to determine what the cause of that capsize was, but it's never, even on the best of days, ideal conditions in the channel. There is the wake, of course, from passing shipping that disturbs the sea and causes waves, as well as just the natural waves and wind out there at this time of year. So these flimsy vessels are not at all suitable for dealing with what is a perilous journey. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, Boris Johnson, even government in France have been warning for some time about the potential for a very significant loss of life in the channel. We saw that borne out yesterday afternoon, with now 27 people confirmed dead. And today, Tom, this is what is just, it makes the blood boil, to be honest, when you see again more people being pushed out into the channel. At 4:15 this morning, a Border Force vessel coming here, offloading another group of migrants, followed by the Dover lifeboat a couple of hours later to offload between 40 and 50 migrants, and there are more incidents now underway in the channel as we speak.
That even after dozens dying in the channel yesterday, more of these boats, these flimsy, rickety vessels, are being launched. Does this suggest that there isn't particularly good communication with those migrants trying to get across on the other side of the channel? Might they not know what had happened yesterday, or are they trying to launch, do you think, despite knowing those risks?
They know exactly what happened yesterday. They're a very sophisticated people smuggling operation now. It is highly lucrative. They are making millions upon millions of euros every week. If you imagine, it's 5,000 euros per head at least to get on these small boats. Now, some of the bigger ones, the 11-metre long boats, can carry up to about 70 people have been on them before. The average is about 40 or 50 on these 11-metre boats. The one that we came across yesterday had 22 people. I mean, if they're paying 5,000 euros a head, it doesn't take much in the way of calculations to realise that when you're getting thousands of people in the course of a week crossing the channel, it is netting millions of euros for the people smugglers. Now, the National Crime Agency notified us that yesterday they had, in conjunction with their French colleagues, arrested 18 people on the French side of the channel on suspicion of people smuggling. So that's 18 people taken out of the loop. But that happens. All that will then happen is that other people smugglers will join in that endeavour, because it is highly lucrative, and whatever the risks of being caught for them, it's worth that risk. The calculation is they stand to make lots of money, and it is a successful business model because the vast majority of people that they send out into the Channel end up getting picked up by British authorities, making it to the UK and entering the asylum system. That is the draw. Because it is so successful, more and more people are coming. French politicians say the numbers gathered on the shores of northwest France at this time of year is unprecedented.
Extraordinary that the French are saying there are so many people gathered on those beaches, gathered in that part of northern France, and yet seem incapable of dispersing those people. Surely if they know those people are gathering, they know that they're there. Why on earth aren't they doing more? The UK's given tens of millions of pounds, seemingly every 6 months, to the French. Are the French doing enough here? Are there talks now that are going to sort of rev up between the UK and France?
There's no doubt, Tom, there are some serious questions now for the French government to answer. Certainly the British government in the form of the Home Secretary, and just yesterday the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, after that emergency crisis cabinet meeting, Cobra, to discuss this issue, was out again saying that the French effectively were not doing enough on their side of the border, that they had rejected an offer by the British actually to give British personnel to that effort on the other side of the Channel, so more border force officers, police officers, National Crime Agency officers, to bolster the numbers on French beaches, to saturate those beaches, to ensure that these small boats can't launch in the first place. And there is, whatever we say and argue about whether the British should be doing more, and they have given, as you just said, £54 million in recent months is being given to the French government. The first instalment of that £54 million extra finance has already gone to the French government to provide more security resources on the beaches. The French themselves have a duty to stop people launching from those beaches into and embarking on what is a very perilous journey, which yesterday we saw end in terrible tragedy. Just as if the situation was reversed on this side of the Channel, the UK government would absolutely have a duty to stop people going off into dangerous journeys across the Channel to France. So there is, regardless of the issues of whether we want people to come via small boats or not, there is an onus on the French, just because of their duty of care as a responsible nation, to stop these people launching from boats in the first place.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for bringing us that vision there, that report from the heart of where this is all happening. I know you've been out on the water yesterday and will be continuing to cover this really vital story for GBNews. Mark White there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Well, we've heard what's going on the ground. Let's talk now about the politics of this all with Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis. He joins me now from Westminster. Jonathan, is the government losing its grip on this?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Tom. And I don't think the government's losing its grip on it. We have introduced the Nationality and Borders Bill, and I was on that board. I was on the Public Bill Committee for that, and it will be coming back for report stage in the House of Commons soon. And that bill is really essential because that helps to deal with the end-to-end process within the United Kingdom in terms of speeding up, but also deterring people from making. Apologies, someone tried calling me. Removing some of the pull factors that are attached to this particular issue, and I think that's really important. So we've offered, as you've heard from Mark, our border force, our National Crime Agency, our police to go and help the French, and they're rejecting that help, and that's something they need to seriously review, and actually they should be accepting our help as soon as they can.
Of course, dampening those pull factors, as the Nationality and Borders Bill attempts to do, will certainly do something. Although we were just hearing that migrants are setting off knowing they may face death in the Channel. It seems that despite a lack of pull factors there must be significant push factors too. Is the Nationality and Borders Bill going to be enough to handle this?
I think there's no one single silver bullet, and the Home Secretary's been very honest about that. And ultimately, it's going to come to cooperation with our European partners, including France. And to be quite frank, the French do need to do more. The fact that we haven't got the European Commission also need to step up. Frontex, obviously, which is their version of our UK border force, is simply not patrolling at sea in the Channel at this moment in time. I want to know why they're not doing that. We need to have that serious question asked and demand that Frontex go out there in the Channel, working with the border force, because whilst they're tracking boats, they're not preventing boats or turning boats around that have already launched. And the scenes of people, the scenes that we're seeing of French police sitting and watching as people take that perilous journey is absolutely appalling. And despite the tens of millions, as you've said, Tom, of UK taxpayers' money being spent, the French are simply not doing enough. If the French get tougher on their borders, on their side of the Channel, then it will deter people from even trying to make the journey to northwest France to then try and come over. So France, whilst they might claim they're doing more inland, and whilst there is also more that we can do downstream, there's ultimately got to be a lot of work done on the borders right now. And when the Nationality and Borders Bill passes, then our government needs to make sure we get those return agreements agreed very soon. Offshoring is absolutely critical, and there does need to be a conversation about the European Convention on Human Rights and the Human Rights Act, and whether or not the UK needs to look at reforming that.
Why the European border force, Frontex, appears to be tracking these boats but not doing anything about them. Is there a political decision being made here, or is it just incompetence?
I think it's incompetence, to be quite honest with you. I think Mr Macron has just basically turned a blind eye to the issue and hoped it will go away and become a UK problem. And ultimately, it's a problem for the people of France as well as it is for the people of the United Kingdom. I think there's outright anger in France that they're seeing people making this journey throughout their country, coming from obviously other mainland European countries, congregating, as we've heard, in northwestern France in numbers that haven't been seen. And yet, the police just seem to be standing on the beaches watching over in France. It's absolutely unacceptable. We've offered our expertise and our support and our surveillance techniques. The French keep saying no. So I want to know, what is Mr Macron doing about it? And if he can't get a grip on this, then I hope the French people will make the ultimate decision about whether or not he should remain as their president in the next elections.
Strong statement there. Now, I wonder, because you mentioned the growing numbers of people that are actually coming to France. We've seen many, many people being pushed to the borders of Poland by Lukashenko in Belarus. There seem to be more and more people simply coming into the system now. And I wonder to what extent it's going to be increasingly futile to try and stop individual people coming across when the numbers are going to be so great. Is there an argument here that legal routes should be set up? Potentially, there should be Brits going through some of those migrant camps, finding those who are genuine refugees and bringing them across to the UK without having to take that perilous journey.
So we are setting up those safe and legal routes. We've done it, as you've seen, in Syria. We've done it in Afghanistan. We're going to the source of where the support is needed. If we set up safe and legal routes within mainland Europe, all we're going to do is attract more people to come to places, to countries such as France, to then potentially attempt that perilous journey, because they may not want to wait in order to go through the normal processing that would be required via safe and legal routes. So I don't think the safe and legal routes within mainland Europe is the answer. I think it is within those countries, which we will be setting up, and we have, as I say, already done within Syria and Afghanistan in the past, and we'll continue to look at other countries such as Pakistan, I'm sure, who are on the border of Afghanistan, about how we can ensure that those people, particularly women and children, who are most at risk from, let's say, extreme regimes such as the Taliban, that can get to our United Kingdom safely and have a safe life. And what we see with Australia is that when they had their three-pronged approach, where pushbacks at sea, the offshoring that they had as well, and obviously patrolling their borders as secure as they were, that it did act as a deterrent. And most importantly, it put the people smugglers out of business. And this is where we need to get to the crux of it. We need to make this journey unviable, because once it's unviable, people won't be putting money into the hands of people smuggling gangs, and those people smuggling gangs will effectively go out of business. But at the moment, their success of the operation currently means that people are willing to take that risk, and we need to therefore put the scumbags, the people smuggling gangs, out of business.
So you're saying there, finally, a two-pronged approach: turn back the boats, make sure those gangs cannot operate their evil practice as they do, but also a more compassionate policy towards the people who are stuck in those terrible parts of the world, who feel like they are in a desperate situation. When do you think those extra routes may be being set up by this government?
Well, those conversations are ongoing with the Home Office, and obviously, as you know, Tom, I'm not in the department, but I have full faith that Priti Patel will be getting those agreements in place, as well as other ministers like Tom Pursglove, who was on the Nationality and Borders Bill committee and has outlined that the intention is to deliver on those safe and legal routes. And as I say, we did that very successfully. He saw the troops who took part in Operation Pitting marching in front of Parliament yesterday as we welcomed them home. Let's not forget 15,000 Afghan refugees brought out of Kabul airport was a fantastic military achievement, as well as a humanitarian achievement as well. And I think that you will see more of this. But as I say, my main focus is at the moment, the French need to do their bit on their side of the channel. It's unacceptable they're not patrolling the waters. It's unacceptable they're standing by on the beaches, not stopping these boats from launching. It's unacceptable that they're not using our intelligence, our surveillance, our expertise on their ground to make sure that we can wrap up these people smuggling gangs and shove those people in prison where they deserve to be.
Well, Jonathan Gullis, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us there this morning. Really, really interesting topic, and no doubt one that will continue to dominate the news agendas in the coming days. It's extraordinary to me that there seem to be so many people coming across in the winter. Of course, this is normally a summer phenomenon. But of course, Jonathan Gullis was a Member of Parliament elected in the 2019 general election, something that was occurring 2 years ago at the moment. And last night, a new book was launched, The Definitive Analysis of the 2019 General Election. The British General Election of 2019, as it's called, draws upon cutting-edge research and wide-ranging elite interviews to provide a comprehensive overview of what went on in the most consequential election, or one of the most consequential elections of our lifetimes. Well, Paula Suraj is the Deputy Director of the UK in a Changing Europe think tank and one of the authors of the British General Election of 2019, and I'm delighted to say can join me now. Paula, thank you for joining us on the programme. First of all, what was the big takeaway of this election? What was the big driving factor, or indeed factors, behind how people voted?
So lots of people have called this the Brexit election. And I don't think that's an entirely unfair description, but there is also an element to it where it was also the culmination of lots of long-term factors. So we had the Brexit driving people to different parties, the Conservatives largely uniting the Leave vote and the Remain vote, then sort of fragmenting off to different parties. But we also had some long-term changes that had been happening, a restructuring of the vote, and that it was those two things that combined to allow the Conservatives to take seats they'd never taken before, in particular, and that obviously was one of the big stories of the election.
To the launch event of this book last night, and I remember repeatedly some of the authors using the phrase BBC, Boris, Brexit, Corbyn. To what extent was the leadership of the different parties a really influential factor here?
So the leadership was an influential factor, and what we found was that liking Boris Johnson was a really important factor for people who switched from Labour to the Conservatives, and disliking Jeremy Corbyn was a really important factor for those that switched from Labour to another Remain party. But in both cases, those leader images draw on particularly people's Brexit position, but also their other values and ideas of what they want politics to be like. So it's quite a complex picture. The leaders are really important, but that kind of just then leads us to the question, well, why did people have the images of those leaders that they did have?
I suppose people sort of projecting upon those leaders their different worldviews. It offers an interesting picture of the future, perhaps, if those images, particularly of how Boris was able to unite that Leave vote behind him, to what extent that will stay behind him as we approach another election in 2 or 3 years' time. Are there any indications that that coalition might be fracturing now?
Only very weak indications at the moment, but I think there's a potential danger for the Conservatives that they end up with this kind of slight pincer movement that Labour suffered from in 2019. So you've got some voters who just really wanted Brexit done, as the slogan went, who might be starting to feel that they're seeing things that make them think, was that quite done how they wanted it to be done? So that gives a threat on the Leave side. On the other side of the divide, the Conservatives actually held on to quite a chunk of the Remain vote, perhaps larger than people had anticipated. And one of the reasons for that was that those voters disliked Corbyn more than they disliked leaving the EU, and so they stayed with the Conservatives. But with new leadership in place in Labour, they'd be less worried about a Labour government and might be more likely to vote Liberal Democrat in particular, as we saw perhaps in Chesham and Amersham, and as we may see in upcoming by-elections. There'll be something to watch to see if that happens.
Interesting points of the book is pointing to those seats that Labour managed to hold on to in the Red Wall. Of course, one of those facets of the election was that the Brexit Party still stood against the Conservatives in Labour-held seats. And your book seems to suggest that that really knocked back what the Tory majority could have been.
Yes, so some modelling by Professor Sir John Curtis and his team in a chapter of the book estimates that there are 25 seats where, had the Brexit Party stood down, the Conservatives would have taken them from Labour. So had the Brexit Party stood down everywhere, it's possible that Boris Johnson, or likely that Boris Johnson, would have had a majority of over 100 seats rather than the 80. And that, of course, is a... So I was just going to say that's a danger for Labour in any upcoming election. At the moment, the Reform Party isn't polling at the sort of levels that the Brexit Party was, so that vote may well tip some of those seats into the Conservative column next time.
And there are some big names in some of those seats. In Doncaster, there's Ed Miliband. I think Yvette Cooper might have been one of those seats as well, where the Brexit Party eclipses the Conservative majority over Labour. Does this suggest that even if there's a swing to Labour at the next election, without the Brexit Party, the Tories may still pick up some of those seats, particularly across what we term as the Red Wall?
Yes, so even a swing to Labour could still see some of those seats fall, and that, I think, we would see that as a kind of continuation of the restructuring and realignment that this elections in 2019 also saw. So it's almost as if the Brexit Party stopped that alignment being complete in some of these seats, and actually we would expect it to continue into 2019. And the question for Labour will be whether or not it can take seats back elsewhere to compensate for that.
Task for the Labour Party at the next general election, not only across swathes of England, but particularly in Scotland as well, where they haven't been able to make ground for a long time now. What's the chance of the Labour Party being able to form the next government? I know it's a big question, but what would you say are the reasonable chances of the Labour Party having a hope of forming the next government at the next election?
So I'm not going to put a probability on it. It's a bit far off for that. But I think it's not unreasonable. You can see a pathway to a Labour government because of the different permutations of coalitions that could bring that about. So if we get to a position where Labour have maybe a small lead in the polls, a bit more of the Conservative vote is willing to float over to the Liberal Democrats, it's easy to see a pathway to a hung parliament. And if we get a hung parliament, we'll almost certainly end up with a Labour-led government.
Tories seem to have burnt many bridges with potential coalition partners, not only the Lib Dems not likely to form another coalition, but also now the Northern Irish Party is pretty scolded by the way that the Conservatives have acted over the protocol. Yeah,
so there's no group within Parliament that you could see would be willing to go into coalition with the Conservatives, and that was largely true in 2019 as well. That for the Conservatives, it was a kind of majority or nothing. There was no trading to be done in a hung parliament situation that would work out in their favour. So where the polls are at the moment, with the parties neck and neck, that might lead us to think that a hung parliament is quite likely where things are at the moment. Obviously, things change very rapidly, and we're still quite a long way away from an election. So I don't think it would be sensible to put too hard a number on where this might end up.
Well, Paula Suraj, one of the authors of the British general election of 2019, thank you very much for joining us this morning. A really fascinating discussion with some hints towards the future as well. Now, the German Social Democrat, Green and Liberal parties have agreed to form a government after 2 long months of talks. Despite the Green involvement in government, Germany has not yet turned course on the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline, an $11 billion project running gas under the Baltic Sea, bypassing Ukraine and taking energy directly from Russia's Arctic region to Germany. This new government appears to continue the policy of dangerous indifference towards Putin's Russia. The Americans, Ukrainians and British are concerned about the security implications of the pipeline. So how far is Germany and the EU bending to the will of Russia? And why does it appear to be doing so? And is this all putting Eastern Europe at risk? Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by Telegraph columnist Juliet Samuel to talk through what on earth the Germans are getting up to, because it seems as if that Germany has been sort of not putting the money into NATO, not being particularly close with the Americans, clearly not having much security cooperation with the British, and almost leaning towards China and Russia.
Well, it's quite an interesting question as to where Germany is going to go next on that score, because they just revealed their coalition agreement yesterday, and the foreign ministry has been handed to the Green Party, which is actually a bit more hawkish and a bit more what we would call traditional strong defense, perversely, because that's not what we associate with the Greens, and they're more skeptical on China and Russia. However, it's very unlikely that Nord Stream 2, the policy on that is going to change. And that's in part because of the other part of the coalition agreement, which lays out their energy policy, which essentially says they're going to wind down coal and continue to wind down nuclear and instead use more gas and more wind turbines. So they're going to need more gas, and there's only, in the absence of letting Europe explore for its own gas, there's only one place that's going to come from, and it's Russia.
Winding down nuclear seems to be the most bizarre, counterproductive decision. Remarkable that this has been signed up to by one of the first, I think the first government of Germany that includes the Green Party. Why on earth are they pursuing this policy that seems to be at odds with the goal of reducing CO2 emissions?
Well, you have to remember that the Green Party in Germany was actually formed originally from a coalition that included the main anti-nuclear campaigners, and that wasn't just anti-nuclear weapons, it was anti-nuclear, civil nuclear power. And so it is in the DNA of the German Green Party to go against nuclear power. Now, the modern situation dates back to a very disastrous, this knee-jerk reaction by Angela Merkel to the Japanese Fukushima disaster, when there was an earthquake and a tsunami at the same time, and it took out a nuclear power plant. And as a result, Merkel basically said, fine, we're going to cancel all of Germany's new nuclear programs, new nuclear plants. And there's absolutely no sign of that changing. And with the Greens in government, it makes it even less likely. There's essentially a neurosis and a huge fear of nuclear power and of nuclear disasters, and that's what's behind it.
Incredibly irrational position. I remember talking to someone at COP26, the climate summit, a couple of weeks ago, an environmental activist who said actually what convinced them that to be in favour of nuclear power was Fukushima, because no one died of radiation poisoning. Remarkable that Germany has sort of taken the opposite lesson of that.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly make that argument that actually Fukushima shows that even if you build a nuclear power station on a tsunami-prone coastline next to a fault line, major fault line, it's actually not that bad. And, you know, Germany has neither of those problems. So it is very perverse. It is a huge problem for moving forwards with lower carbon power. But, you know, there is this fear, I suppose, brought on by perhaps being close to the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl disaster, and there isn't really a recognition that particularly the new generation of nuclear plants are even safer than the ones before, and that they are. I mean, you could fly. I think that they're designed to be safe. Even if you directly fly a jumbo jet onto the reactors, they still have to withstand it.
Wow, that's pretty extraordinary and a really concerning move from Germany, a legacy almost of Angela Merkel, someone who's got some pretty favourable opinion ratings in much of the West, but seems to be the case that a lot of her legacy will actually be this pivot towards China and Russia, and maybe not the best thing after all.
Yeah, I think Germany, its problem is that it has not for a long time really grappled with strategic realities, with the fact that if you are a government of a Western country, you do still have to defend yourself and you do still have to put resources towards that. And they've been able to free ride for a long time on US strength and US spending. And I think Trump slightly underlined that maybe that's not going to go on forever, but Germany still hasn't learned the lesson from it.
No, a really fascinating point of foreign policy, and one that doesn't look like we'll be turning around anytime soon. Well, Juliet Samuel, columnist at The Telegraph, thank you very much for joining me this morning on The Briefing. I'm afraid that's the end of the interview and indeed the end of the programme. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christys and Mercy Moroki. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Good morning. Fine and sunny, if somewhat cold today, but from tomorrow onwards the weather's going to get very lively, starting with some very strong winds on Friday across northern Britain, and all parts of the UK likely to be very blustery on Saturday. That's going to come from this area of low pressure that is developing at the moment between Iceland and Greenland. Back to the UK, though, for today. We've had this cold front crossing the UK, introducing clearer skies. So plenty of sunshine around through the morning, but it is pretty cold out there, accentuated by the wind, which is blowing in a few showers across eastern England, rain showers here, and maybe Pembrokeshire and Cornwall too. Snow showers, though, over northern Scotland, mostly over the hills. At low levels, a mixture of rain and hail. The wind's steadily easing through the day, but nevertheless, it's going to feel cold out there. 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 degrees, but add on that wind, and it really does feel pretty cold this morning. It'll turn cold quickly this evening as well, with the frost forming fairly sharply. But look at this. Here comes that low pressure system we saw earlier. A bit of snow on the hills, but mostly rain overnight across northern Britain. And then the winds start to strengthen yet again as this rain pushes southwards across England and Wales during Friday. And then the colder air really hits northern Scotland, so the rain showers turning back to snow, down to relatively low levels through Friday, and the winds start to strengthen later in the day. Showers across much of the country then during Friday. As I said, at this stage, certainly across the south, they will be of rain, but snow showers in northern Scotland. Temperatures back up a touch, but feeling colder. This low pressure system then heading through the North Sea, bringing those very strong winds on Friday across the north, but more widely across the country on Saturday. So we have Met Office yellow warnings in place. Gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour, maybe 70, possibly around some exposed coast, 80 miles an hour. Could cause some disruption. So keep up to date with the forecast. The warnings are on the Met Office website.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.